Welcome to the Learning Reimagined podcast, where we discuss solutions to employee training and development challenges in the Caribbean. We speak with Caribbean professionals who are experts at helping people in Caribbean organizations excel. And we want to help you, our Caribbean audience, level up your teams, your employees, so that your businesses can succeed.
Tameka Stewart is the founder of TMS Learning Management, a consultancy specializing in designing and developing bespoke training and learning solutions for small, medium, and large businesses. With a master's degree in instructional design and performance improvement, she has a deep understanding of effective learning methodologies and a keen eye for maximizing performance outcomes. Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the Learning Reimagined podcast. And today I have with me Tameka. Hello, Tameka. So we're going to be speaking about how to boost or to develop talents to improve business performance. And I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you, Tameka.
Thank you for having me. I hope you're still excited at the end of it.
Oh, I will be. I have no doubts.
Okay.
So we're going to just dive right in, right?
Sure.
And my first question comes from a place of understanding challenges, right? What are some of the common challenges companies face with developing talent strategically? So
well,
one big challenge.
Based on the experience that I've had, and I've been fortunate enough to work with different companies across different industries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though the majority of my experience is in call center, but I've also worked with small and medium-sized businesses as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I have seen that's common right across the board in terms of challenges is really related specifically to hiring and training. That's usually where you find the challenges. So I usually hear a person saying, we can't find the talent. And then, sometimes when they do find the talent, then there are challenges with training in terms of there's no alignment with the training and the business goals. Maybe training not occurring frequently enough or consistently enough. So usually most of those challenges tend to be centered around the hiring process and then also the training.
Interesting. And then since we're talking about the challenges with hiring and training, how can organizations deal with those challenges?
Well, I think what the organization can do to help to, mitigate some of that is with regards to the hiring, they usually have specific roles that they need filled, right? But I saw an episode previously and the young lady said you're dealing with people, right? Which is true. And you always want to make sure that when you're hiring, that the people that you're hiring, that they're a good fit. So your hiring process should be pretty tight. I know that there are a lot of companies that tend to use like psychometric testing and not just, like a face-to-face interview and then, they come in. But you need to have a pretty tight strategy with regards to your hiring, your onboarding and your orientation, right? Because of course you want to make sure that they're familiar with your processes and your procedures. And then once that is in place, then you also want to make sure that you have an extremely good training program. So it's not something that you really should skimp on. I don't advise companies skimp on training, right? It's really something that you should have a lot of analysis around, a lot of thought around, based on what it is that your business would like to accomplish. And then it's from there that you develop the training and then you roll out. I think if you get those things right, then you have a pretty solid strategy going in and you should be able to accomplish your goals.
And since you mentioned a good training program, what does a good training program look like?
So a good training program really speaks to, one, making sure that your employees are developed to function in the role that you have hired them to function in. And then secondly, you also want to develop them now so that they can assume other roles in the organization, right? Because nobody wants to stay at one level. So, if an employee is hired for a specific task, say for example, they started off as a frontline worker, right? Eventually that employee, which is human being, right, would like to aspire to other things. They want to move up to leadership. They may see something, another area in the organization that they're interested in and they want to move on from where they are, but they never really want to stay static. So because of that, it is it's incumbent on the organization to make sure that your training program also takes that into consideration. So not just training for the job and the specific task, but what we also like to call like a succession planning, right? How can you help your employee to move to occupy other areas in your organization, not just that one job or role that they started with, and you're expecting them to kind of stay there and die, there.
Yeah. So true. And that leads to another important question about strategies and methods.
Right.
So what methods or strategies can companies use to assess the potential of their employees and identify high potential individuals?
I am big on learning and development analytics, right?
Okay.
And it sounds a little bit complex to some people because when people hear analytics, they automatically think numbers, hate numbers, right? I can get it, right? I wasn't so good at math, but that's for a whole different discussion. But in terms of the numbers, though, it's not just really, you don't have to be like a math guru to be able to look at your numbers and ask yourself, what are my numbers saying to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of a strategy, you want to make sure that you have systems in place that you collect your data, whether it is that you're going to use a learning management system. Learning management systems are great for collecting learner-centered data, so you'll know, what courses were rolled out, how many persons completed those courses. But not only that, you should also have access to like performance data, right? So the KPIs that you're using to measure the performance for your employees, who has those numbers? Usually that's your business leaders, right? And then you also want to tie that back with HR. HR keeps numbers as it relates to attrition, attendance, and all of that. So as the person in the role, right, you want to ensure that you have access to these different data points because they say something different. And then when you look at the numbers, you say to yourself, okay, fine, what exactly are these numbers saying to me? So I always encourage persons in learning and development to kind of get into analytics because it really does give you, I think it gives you a clearer picture, a more holistic picture in terms of what may be happening with your employees as opposed to, just being stuck in your little area, just the learning and development data, but you're not liaising with the business leaders and finding out what's going on there. You're not liaising with HR and finding out what's going on there. So you really want to make sure that that approach is holistic and kind of delve into the analytics. Like I said, you don't need any kind of expertise, but just make sure you're looking at the numbers and just ask yourself, what exactly are these numbers saying?
Important, very important. The data is critical because you can't make informed decisions without the right
and
data.
Here's the thing too. A lot of business leaders these days, especially those who deal with financials, they're number driven.
Very
That's the language they
numbered.
speak,
Yep.
right? There's always a divide in organizations with learning and development people and the people who they say do the business. So it's often that learning and development or training is kind of looked at as more like order taking. Oh, we need a training, but not necessarily as solutioning. So we want to kind of move away from that. And if we're going to be a part of the conversations that take place in the C-suite, right, where you have people talk about, fiscal goals and financial goals, and it's important for your learning and development person to be present and to also to have a voice because it's the skills that they're training that will eventually push or drive those numbers. So if there's a disconnect at any point, you can see where a misalignment can cause the performance, to go down.
Right.
So I would tell a lot of learning and development professionals to make sure you know your business, know how the business makes money. Because that's whatever you do, that is what's driving that. Whatever solution you design, whatever intervention you design, you're driving a physical number. So you want to make sure that you know, and then it puts you in a better position to be able to contribute to that conversation because not only are you saying this is what is going on, but you're saying, okay, based on this that is going on, I can suggest this. So you move from just saying, you move into more predictive information. So based on what the numbers are saying to me, I would suggest that we do this as our learning strategy going forward, as opposed to just the flat number saying, okay, fine, this is what the numbers are saying. Okay, now what do we do kind of situation.
Agree 100%. And then leading from that, you just mentioned something that would
partially answered this question because you mentioned numbers and metrics and connecting the business outcomes with learning and development. But what are the other essential components of a successful talent development strategy?
I think overall, I pinpoint 4 main areas. I think there should definitely be clarity around your business or your organizational goals, because that's where it all starts, right? And then you need a solid hiring strategy. So that's the second component for me. Third component is you need a solid training strategy. And then, of course, you also need assessment, or what we, refer to as evaluation. I think if you have those 4 in place and you are doing pretty well in those areas, then you should be able to move, not just being a company where you're hiring and people not moving, but to a company that is now more able to develop and train your employees to assume roles and make it easier in terms of, should one person need to, should you have a need in an area, then you have an employee with the talent or the skill that can actually fill that need. And so whenever you're hiring, you're not hiring for roles that, say, for example, people are just exiting, but you are in terms of people sit there and not moving, but in terms of your internal people now moving to assume senior roles, and then you're taking in people to kind of backfill those junior roles.
And you also mentioned hiring strategy a lot. Tell us some more about the key components of an effective hiring strategy.
My main area of focus is really learning and development, but in a previous role, I also did do some hiring. So they had a strategy in place where the first part of the interview would always be done by somebody from HR.
Okay.
And that component also involved psychometric testing and any additional testing that they felt was needed. But they also felt that it was very important that members of the training team also did what they considered to be a kind of second interview. So the questions that we would ask that new hire were more from a learning and retention perspective in terms of, who is this learner? How does this person learn? And we would be able to determine that based on conversation. So and also the final interview for that new hire would be with the operations team. So again, it's the 3 main arms kind of aligning and functioning to make sure that when we make a selection on this candidate, that this candidate is a right fit, because all 3 major areas said yes, based on the different criteria that we're looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So in terms of business alignment, how can businesses align their talent development strategy with their overall business goals and objectives?
I think it's communication. If I should use one word, it really is communication, because when you talk about alignment, it's really just ensuring that all the different arms of your business is really functioning in sync. So whatever the goal is, say, for example, we say, okay, this particular quarter, we want to be able to increase our bottom line by 20%. For example, that's the goal. But that 20%, of course, is going to be impacted by different persons who are responsible for different areas. So when I say communication, that's what I mean. Every single major stakeholder or every single arm of the business should be communicating to ensure that there is alignment. To me, that's the biggest thing. Because if the leaders come out and say, okay, fine, this is the goal, then you have HR coming in and saying, okay, fine, how are we now going to be able to use what we have to ensure that we're hiring the right talent, right? And then you have training coming in to say, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to train? How do we need to follow up with these people to ensure that the performance is what it needs to be, so that at the end of the day, that 20% increase can be realized. So for me, it really is constant and consistent communication between the different stakeholders.
And constant and consistent communication that helps bring clarity.
Precisely. And the same episode I watched, the young lady said she wanted a dashboard, right? And I agree, because usually HRIS systems allow you to be able to access like the dashboard for an employee, so you see what's going on. And so the communication, of course, not only involves just what we want to accomplish, but also, again, involves a look at the numbers. Where are we? Where is the performance? What are you seeing in your area? What are you seeing from your perspective? And us really kind of coming back and saying, okay, fine, do we need to change something? So that's exactly what I'm referring to.
So you just spoke about technology.
Right.
And we're going to dive a little bit more into that because we want to understand how technology can help with talent development. So help us to see the connection between the two.
So I love technology, right? With all its ups and downs. And I think the latest one I hear a lot of people kind of crying about, some are happy, some are not so happy, is AI, right? Because you think about the possibilities, and the possibilities are endless. But for example, I did mention earlier the importance of learning and development data, and that you really should be looking at your numbers and finding the story behind the numbers to be able to offer solutions. Technology is at the point where if you have a HRIS system or you have a learning management system and say numbers, it's just not your thing. But these systems are now set up with the technology to be able to actually do the analysis for you. So the only thing you need to be able to do is just to go in and pull a report. You know, you may have launched a course. Say, for example, you were asked to uptrain a group of people and you want to see how many persons came for the training. That's one piece of the data, right? So when you pull that, then you also can follow up and say, okay, of the persons who completed the training, how are they now performing, right? So I think the technology makes it way easier in terms of you have access to a broader range of data points that you can see it from different perspectives, and that should be able to help you in terms of guiding you to come up with like a better, more effective learning and development or talent management plan.
Because you're using the data to guide
your planning, and the numbers are not arbitrary and random.
Exactly. And you're not going based off your gut feeling.
No. So and usually again, when you have the numbers and you can say this is what it is showing, there's more credibility there. You know, it's not a guess and spell. It's this is the trends we've been seeing, and so it's saying this. Now what do we do?
Exactly. So, and that's what the C-suite will listen to. That's what the CEO will listen to.
That's what they
very
want.
important. That's what
they
want.
relate to that very easily. Yes.
All right. So, in a rapidly evolving business landscape, how can organizations ensure their talent development strategies remain relevant and adaptable?
For me, that's an easy one. You want to always be assessing and evaluating your employees, and you always want to be looking back at your training.
Okay.
Right? Because if we agree that training is the way, it's the path, right? You always have to make sure that there's alignment there. So when you look at the performance, if it's not where it needs to be, then it's training that's going to have to help you to get it to where it should be. So when you're consistently looking at these two things, how are my employees performing? Where are their gaps? All right, let's look back at the training. The training that we're currently doing, is that effective? Is it, sufficient? Is it up to date? Do we need to change something? Do we need to add more elements? Do we need to remove an element? So it's a constant process of evaluating and re-evaluating. I don't believe that it should be rigid and structured, because the rigidity takes away from the flexibility. So as an organization, you have to have a system in place where it is flexible enough that should you need to change something, it changes quite easily without too much negative impact.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. Are there any emerging trends or future challenges that businesses should consider when developing their talent pipeline?
Yes, trends. I like AI.
I know why you went back to that point, right? You slid that right back in.
yeah, because it's the technology is dynamic enough to be able to do some pretty awesome stuff where data and the interpretation of the data is concerned, right? So that is a trend I would certainly advise business leaders to be just a little bit more open with. Challenge, quiet quitting. Yep.
Very big challenge.
It's a thing. It's a thing. An employee comes into an organization and they're not engaged, for whatever reason. Maybe they don't feel that there's a fit, but because there is no engagement, because, persons are not doing due process, then these people kind of develop, I put it as kind of, it's really a bitterness, right? And you decide, you know what, I'm just going to move on and I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And when it's my time, I'm just going to give the notice. Some don't even give the notice, right?
Just move.
And it speaks to for me, the whole quiet quitting phenomenon that people are talking about speaks to a group of people who think differently. And again, we are dealing with people. They're not just, employees. They're not robots. So they think about quality of life. Their goals have changed. And so they're thinking about, how does this role, how does this organization, how does it fit into my overall quality of life? Can I grow here? Do I have the ability to earn more here? Or is it that I'm just going to be stuck in this one role forever and ever and just amen?
And that shouldn't be the case.
Right. And so when they recognize that it's not necessarily that, whether it's that it's not a cultural fit or, they're not satisfied with pay, again, the fact that they choose to quiet quit is in and of itself speaking volumes, right? So the mindset of the people that you're working with. And I think if you understand the mindset, then it should put you in a position to be able to come up with some mitigating strategies so that you reduce that.
I reduce it quickly before it gets out of control.
Yeah.
Are there any success stories or examples that you can share where effective talent development had a significant impact on business performance?
Yeah, sure. In my previous life, as a senior training manager, we had a system that was rolled out called a continuous improvement process, just as the name suggests. So we had weekly meetings between those members in training, the business leaders, HR, and wherever the challenges were in terms of performance, we would make that the focus of the meeting.
Okay.
What that did was that it provided an opportunity for all the key stakeholders to sit down, look at the issue that we're facing and really see what the numbers are saying, because we had to come, whether these were new hires, we had to come to that conversation with because we follow them for 90 days, right? We are responsible for performance and everything for them for 90 days once they come in. So we would take their performance data, because we track that and we collect that as well. The business leader would also have that, and then HR would come with their numbers from their perspective. And we would say, okay, fine, this is the problem we're having. And the good thing about that is we were able to, from those conversations, really and truly determine if training was needed. The interesting thing that we found out is that a lot of the time, it wasn't a training concern.
Interesting.
That a lot of the times it tended to be issues with leadership or management. And so if we did not have the opportunity to really take a close look at that, then what would happen is, training would be functioning as order taking. They would come and say, oh, my guys are not performing. They need to be trained. And then you would either have to, depending on, the training strategy, you have to pull them from production, which we don't necessarily want. But depending on what it is, sometimes you may have to do that. Other times it could just be as simple as a job aid or something kind of micro learning, right? But if we did not have that opportunity, then what that says is that we'd be doing a lot of training interventions when the problem isn't really a training problem. So I'd like to let people know that you train because there's a knowledge gap. That's why you train. So whenever you find out that there's either a new process, a new procedure, or there's something that your people just don't know, then that's a good time to train. But sometimes organizations get into this habit of saying you want training when you really talk to your people and do the evaluation and look at all the numbers objectively. You realize, this is really not a training issue, because it's not that they don't know. But for some reason, we're either seeing a lack of consistency, and then we need to find out why is it that if they know, why are they not doing what they're supposed to be doing? There's something else going on there. And so then that speaks to, it could potentially be that sometimes they do have a problem with their leadership. And so when people have a problem with other people, the first place it manifests is in job performance. So that's what 100%. I loved about that strategy. And that was an example, because we continued that and we saw a significant improvement, because all persons were having the opportunity to have that conversation instead of everybody trying to fix an issue in their own little space.
I love that. I love that. So what I love about what you just said is that there was a realization that training wasn't the solution in that particular case. It was a bigger issue.
And some people, when you tell them that, they're like shocked, like, it's not training. No, it's not. You don't have a training problem. You may have a leadership issue, not a training.
Not the training. Well, and sometimes they like to use training as putting a band-aid over. Yeah.
And we definitely don't want to do that. If the organization is one that wants to be able to perform well and do well, you don't want to do band-aid fixes. You may as well just get to the root of it, identify what it is, and just implement the solutions that's going to make that difference.
Agreed, 100%. So Tameka, can you tell us what your final tips and closing remarks would be to the audience? Any big ideas or advice that you'd like to leave with them?
Well, it's sometimes ideas are small, but they're still effective. I think it's very important that we remember that at the core of talent development is people. And it always pays to know people, and it also pays to love people. And because we're dealing with human beings and they have feelings and thoughts, then when you dedicate yourself to understanding and then working from there, you will always get a better result than if you just try to apply something wholesale. So for me, that's just what I would share. It's very small, it's no big, but understanding people, loving people, and having a desire to serve and serve effectively will make a huge difference, right? Because the solutions, the technology, all of that changes, and it changes pretty quickly. So if you're a professional, your only thing is just to make sure I know what the latest technology is. I know what this can be. But then because you have an exposure, depending on your understanding coming away from dealing with people, you'll know what is best to apply, right? So I would always just suggest get to know your people, love your people, be willing to serve, and, you just take it from there.
Thank you so much, Tameka. That's lovely advice, and you've given us a lot of food for thought throughout this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you. You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
I hope the audience got some great nuggets from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.